Denton, Arkansas had a hot lunch program, and they were having trouble with it in their school. The kids wouldn't eat there because the food, they said, was too poor in quality. The school board was losing about $1,000 a month. Finally, in disgust, they went out and talked to McDonald's. McDonald's came in and set up shop in the school cafeteria. McDonald's is making a profit. 10 times as many kids are eating there every noon, and the school board's saving the taxpayers $1,000 a month. 2/3 of the cities and towns in America contract out with private companies for garbage disposal. Those 2/3 of the cities and towns in this country get their garbage picked up for 68% less than the cities and towns that have their own municipal departments. Have the great corporations, sometimes I worry, have they abdicated their responsibility to preserve the freedom of the marketplace out of a fear of retaliation or a reluctance to rock the boat? If they have, they're feeding the crocodile, hoping he'll eat them last. We can fight City Hall, and you don't have to be a giant to do it. In New Mexico, there's a little company, a husband and wife own it. She's the president. And they have 5 employees. And the other day, 2 OSHA inspectors arrived at the door. And they demanded to come in to go on a hunting expedition, see if there were any violation of their safety rules, and if there were automatic fines. There is no appeal. And she said, "Where's your warrant?" And they said, "We don't need one." She said, "You do to come in here," and shut the door. Well, they went out and they got a warrant. And they came back, but this time she had her lawyer with her. And he looked at it, and he said, "It does not show probable cause." And a federal court upheld her right to do this. Up in Pocatello, Idaho, was a man, elderly man with grown sons. They owned a subcontracting plumbing and electrical firm, 35 employees. He had known that someday they would get to his door, and he'd wondered what he would do. And he'd heard about the woman in New Mexico. Sure enough, they came to his door. And he said, "Not without a warrant." And they read him paragraph 8A of the OSHA Act. And he pointed to a framed copy of the Constitution on the wall of his office and said, "I think there's a higher law." Well, they came back not with a warrant, but with a court order. He defied it. He was cited for contempt. He got a lawyer. Now his friends and even the lawyer tried to talk him out of it. They said, "You can't fight the government. That's too big for you." And I just love what he said to his friends. He said, "You know, we send our young fellas out to fight and die for freedom. Maybe it's time some of us old duffers did something for a change." Today, his case is before the United States Supreme Court because a federal court has ruled that OSHA is in violation of our constitutional protection against illegal search and seizure. But why don't more of us challenge what Cicero called the arrogance of officialdom? Why don't we set up communications between organizations, trade associations, to rally others to come to the aid of an individual like that, or to an industry or profession when they're threatened by the barons of bureaucracy, who have forgotten that we are their employers. Government by the people works when the people work at it. We could begin by turning the spotlight of truth on the widespread political and economic mythology that I mentioned. A recent poll of college and university students, they must have skipped this campus, because in this poll they found that the students estimated that business profits in America averaged 45%. That's 9 times the average of business profits in this country. But it was understandable that the kids made that mistake because the professors in the same poll guessed that the profits were even higher. Then there's the fairy tale born of political demagoguery that the tax structure imposes unfairly on the low earner with loopholes designed for the more affluent. Well, again, the truth. At $23,000 of earnings, you become one of that exclusive band of 10% of the earners in America. And that 10% pays 50% of the income tax, but only takes 5% of all the deductions, the so-called loopholes that are allowed by law. The other 95% are taken by the 90% of earners below $23,000 who pay the other half of the tax. The most dangerous myth is the demagoguery that business can be made to pay a larger share, thus relieving the individual. Politicians preaching this are either deliberately dishonest or economically illiterate, and either one should scare us. Business doesn't pay taxes, and who better than business to make this message known? Only people pay taxes, and people pay, as consumers, every tax that is assessed against a business. Begin with the food and fiber raised on the farm, to the ore drilled in a mine, to the oil and the gas from out of the ground, whatever it may be, through the processing, through the manufacturing, on out to the retailer's license. If the tax cannot be included in the price of the product, no one along that line can stay in business. And if you want to explain it simply, a loaf of bread. If the farmer can't get enough for his wheat to pay the tax on his farm, the real estate tax, he can't go on raising wheat. And so when you buy that loaf of bread tomorrow, just take a look. 151 taxes are in that loaf of bread, amounting to more than half of the price of the bread. The federal government has used its taxing power to redistribute earnings, to achieve a variety of social reforms. Politicians love those indirect business taxes because it hides the cost of government. During the New Deal days, an Undersecretary of the Treasury told the Congress, indeed wrote a book in which he said, the taxes can serve a higher purpose than just raising revenue. He said they could be an instrument of social and economic control to redistribute the wealth and income and to penalize particular industries and economic groups. We need to put an end to that. We need a simplification of the tax structure. We need an indexing of the surtax brackets, a halt to government's illicit profiting through inflation. It's as simple as this. Every time the cost of living index goes up 1%, government's revenue goes up 1.5%. And above all, we need an overall cut in the cost of government. Government spending isn't a stimulant to the economy, it's a drag on the economy. Only a decade ago, about 15% of corporate gross income was required to pay the interest on corporate debt. Now it's 40%. Individuals and families once spent about 8% of their disposable income on interest on consumer debt, the installment buying, mortgage, and so forth. Today, it's almost 1/4 of their total earnings. State and local government in the last 15 years has gone from 70 to 220 billion. The total private and public debt is growing 4 times as fast as the output of goods and services. Again, there's something we can do. I don't know, has Jack been here yet in the series, or is he coming? He's coming. Well, you'll be treated to Jack Kemp. He used to quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, and now he's a congressman from New York. He has a bill before the Congress. It is designed to increase productivity, to create jobs for people, and it's as simple as this. It calls for over a 3-year period reducing across the board the income tax cut for all of us by a full 1/3. And also, it would reduce the corporate tax from 48 to 45%. The base income tax would no longer be 20, it would be 14%, and the ceiling would be 50% instead of 70, and it would double the exemption for smaller businesses before they get into the surtax bracket. It would do all the things that we need to provide investment capital and to increase productivity and create jobs. We can say this with assurance because it's been done twice before. In the 20s under Coolidge, and again in the 60s under John F. Kennedy. In the 60s, the stimulant to the economy was so immediate that even government's revenues increased because of the broadening base of the economy. But the Congress, the majority, is concerned with further restrictions on our freedom, land planning that threatens the very concept of private ownership, the Humphrey Hawkins bill, which would regulate this economy to an extent that has never been practiced outside of socialist or totalitarian power. In my own state of California, the legislature is talking about using tax funds to establish a state-owned bank to compete with private banks. Well, Jack Kemp's bill has been voted down. He's brought it up 5 times, and the majority in Congress has voted it down. But every time, more come across the aisle and vote with him. The last time he had 195 votes, and he's getting ready to put it up for the 6th time. Again, if the people will make their wants known to Congress, you'll get what you want. You see, it isn't necessary to make Congress see the light. Just make them feel the heat. But I've talked about the communications we need. We can't let the doctor remain alone in his lonely fight against socialized medicine, or the oil industry fight its own battle against divestiture or crippling controls, repressive taxes, or the farmer who hurts more than most because of government harassment and rule changing in the middle of the game. All of these issues concern each one of us, regardless of what our trade or our profession may be. Corporate America must begin to realize that it has allies in the independent businessmen and women and the shopkeepers, the craftsmen, the farmers, and the professions. All these men and women are organized in a great variety of ways, but we talk within our own organizations about our own problems. The drug industry for itself. What we need is a liaison between these organizations to realize how much strength we as a people still have if we'll use that strength. I mentioned oil. Is there anyone that isn't concerned with the energy problem? Government caused that problem while we all stood by unaware that we were involved. Unnecessary regulations and prices imposed, price limits, back in the 50s are the direct cause of today's crisis. Our crisis isn't because of a shortage of fuel, it's a surplus of government. Now we have a new agency. We have a new agency of enormous power. 20,000 employees and a $10.5 billion budget. That's more than the gross earnings of the top 7 oil companies in the United States, and that's just to start with. It is nothing more than a first step toward nationalization of the oil industry. And you know, when they tell us about the conservation, of course we should save. No one should waste a natural resource. But they act as if we found all the oil and gas there is to be found in this continent, if not the world. Do you know that 57 years ago, our government told us we only had enough left for 15 years? And 19 years went by and they told us we only had enough left for 13 more years. And we've done a lot of driving since then, and we'll do a lot more if government will do one simple thing. Get out of the way and let the incentives of the marketplace urge the industry out to find the sources of energy this country needs. You know, it has been said that politics is the second oldest profession. And I've come to realize over the last few years it bears a great similarity to the first. Why can't we look at other nations that have chosen this path of government intervention before us? Our British cousins. They're where we'll be in 15 years if we continue in the present course, if we have that much time. For 40 years, Sweden has been held up to us as an example that socialism really will work. There's an enlightened country, they say, and look how well they're doing. Well, it was just a little over a year ago that the Swedes went to the polls and voted against Karl Marx. I think maybe the straw that broke the camel's back was a change in the income tax laws. They changed the tax to read that at $33,000 of earnings, the tax rate was 102%. We've had enough of sideline kibitzers telling us the system which they themselves have thrown out of sync with their social tinkering can be improved or saved if we'll only have more of that tinkering or even government planning and management. They play fast and loose with a system that for 200 years made us the light of the world, the refuge for people from all over the world who just yearn to breathe free. You heard the moving story of the woman who came through 2 countries and finally to this country. It's time we recognize that the system, no matter what our problems are, has never failed us once.